I hope that 2 Corinthians 2:11 is true for you, because it's certainly not true for most Christians. Verses 10 and 11 of that chapter say, I have forgiven in the sight of Christ for your sake, in order that, and here's the key point, that Satan might not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes. Sadly, truthfully, but tragically, 2 Corinthians 2:11 does not apply to most Christians, because most Christians are regularly outwitted by the devil. And most Christians have no idea about his schemes, his devices, his designs. We like to blame Satan for a lot of problems in life. The degradation of society, the strife in our families, the flat tire that I got last Tuesday, whatever happened to Marvel after Endgame. But I think it's a fair question to ask, what the heck is this guy's problem? Like, what is his deal? Why does he possibly expect that he could defeat God? What is his master plan? I find Satan to be weird, and I'd like to understand what he's doing throughout the Bible. Turn with me to Genesis 3, and let's get weird. Welcome to Weird Stuff in the Bible, where we explore scripture passages that are bizarre, perplexing, or just plain weird. This is Luke Taylor, and today we're going to be talking about Satan's master plan, and I believe I know exactly what it is. I posed this in the intro. How could Satan ever expect to defeat an omnipotent God? I mean, frankly, Satan knows the Bible pretty well. He probably knows it better than you or I do. How could Satan expect that he has any chance of overcoming the supreme God who created the entire universe? Well, the answer is he can't. Unless God gives Satan the opportunity. Unless God gives Satan the chance or some kind of target to aim for. For example, if God says that his whole plan for humankind and planet Earth depends on X, if it all hinges on X, then Satan doesn't have to destroy God to defeat God. Satan just has to destroy X. So the question then becomes, has God done this? Has God given Satan something within his reach that he could swing for? Well, I'm going to lay out my case for why I think, yes, that God has given Satan, we might say, the opportunity. And this is going to contextualize a lot of the storyline of the Bible for you today, especially a lot of the weird stuff in the Bible. This episode might make some of it not so weird anymore. So let's begin at the beginning. Let's go all the way back to when sin entered the world in Genesis 3. And you know the story. Adam and Eve ate the fruit. Adam blamed her. She blamed the snake. The snake was the devil. And God gives this prophetic utterance to these three right after this happened. In Genesis 3:15, and he specifically says this to the devil, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And many people rightfully take this as a messianic prophecy. This is about Jesus. Two seeds are spoken of right here. There's a seed of Satan and a seed of the woman. And we'll talk about the seed of Satan, but the seed of the woman is obviously Jesus. And this is the first place in the Bible where God announces that a Savior is coming someday. This is the first messianic prophecy. Sin has just entered the world a few minutes ago, and God is already saying, well, now everything is messed up. There's going to be struggles and pain and thorns and life sucks and then you die. But then God immediately gives the first prophetic declaration of a future Messiah. And God does so by announcing where this Messiah will come from. He says the Messiah will descend from a woman. So now we know where the Messiah is going to come from. A human woman. And now that might seem obvious to us. I mean, we already know about Christmas. We already know how God entered this world. So this really comes as no surprise to us. But let's analyze what this declaration meant to Adam and Eve. It means God's not going to just descend from the clouds like an angel. He's not sending a Messiah to pop out of the ground. He's not going to be some kind of animal. He's not getting delivered with free 2-day shipping from Amazon Prime. The future Messiah will be born of a woman. And guess what? This Messiah is going to crush Satan's head. And that's bad news for Satan. But Satan also has some good news, or at least some potential good news. If he wants to stop the Messiah from coming, now he knows what he has to do. All he has to do is stop the human bloodline. And I mean, if you think about it, in a way, God's kind of pigeonholed himself into this plan to use one of Eve's descendants as the Messiah. God could have just had the Messiah pop out of the ground at some point. I mean, if God wanted to, God could have done that. It would have been pretty simple. Satan probably couldn't do anything with that information. If God had said the Messiah was going to descend from the clouds someday, well, Satan probably couldn't have done anything about that either. But instead, God has made it, you might say, he's made it a little more difficult for himself. God promises to send the Messiah through humanity. He's going to send the Messiah into the world as a baby through a human female. I mean, that's kind of weird that God would do that, right? Well, let's turn the page. Eve heard this prophecy, and she probably assumed that when she had a son someday, and it's going to be Cain right off the bat, she probably assumed that he was going to be this Messiah that God had prophesied would come from her. And so that's why it says in Genesis 4:1, now Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. The word Cain means gotten. She's saying, I've got the man. I've got the Messiah who is here to fix my mistake. Well, of course, as you keep reading, they don't do so well with Cain. He ends up killing his brother. The population of the whole world goes down 25% in just a moment. And I would imagine Satan probably had something to do with enticing Cain to kill Abel. I would imagine that he thinks his plan of killing off the human bloodline, it's off to a great start. He's just wiped out 1/4 of humanity right there. 1 down, 3 to go. And even Eve knows at this point, Cain is not going to be anybody's Messiah. Well, as they say in the Jurassic Park movies, life finds a way. And the human bloodline pushes forward. Adam and Eve have Seth. Seth and Cain start having kids. Please don't ask me where their wives came from. I don't want to do a whole episode about that. But humanity keeps growing, keeps expanding. And Genesis 4 and 5 talk about all the people who were born of Cain and Seth, and it traces their bloodline all the way to the flood. But why did the flood happen? And if humanity basically started over with the flood of Noah, why is the Bible even bothering to give us a genealogy of people prior to the flood? Well, if you're a longtime listener of this podcast, or if you already know about the Nephilim and the sons of God, then you already know what happened that caused God to send a flood. Genesis 6 verses 1-4 say, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Now, if you're a normal, well-adjusted Bible reader, you probably read through those verses before, and you kind of thought, oh, that's weird. And then you moved on without really giving it a second thought. But if you're a listener of this podcast, you're probably not a normal, well-adjusted Bible reader. And so in case you've never really thought through this story very deeply before, the sons of God, these were actually angelic beings. They manifested in bodily form on the earth. And it said that they impregnated human women, and they created a new race of hybrids that were called the Nephilim. And these Nephilim were human-like in many ways. They were taller and stronger than normal humans. It's very likely they had extra fingers and toes, and they were also very bloodthirsty and dangerous. And so when this started to happen, at that point, God put a countdown on planet Earth of 120 years. He said, in 120 years, I'm going to flood the entire planet and wipe out all of this life. And in that 120 years, their bloodline began to spread quickly over the face of the earth. It was starting to get to the point that fewer and fewer people were untainted by the Nephilim DNA, that almost all the people in the world were getting to the point where they had some level of Nephilim bloodline. This was a plot of Satan. The seed of the serpent is what's in view right here, and it's spreading. And if it got to the point that all of mankind was infected with the seed of the serpent, with the Nephilim bloodline, then Satan would have defeated God's plan, because then the Messiah could not have come through one of Eve's descendants. He would have basically tainted all of mankind. And if he could stop mankind, then he could stop the Messiah. But then there's this man named Noah. And Noah doesn't have any Nephilim blood in his system. It says in Genesis 6:9, this is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. It said Noah was perfect in his generations. Have you ever wondered what that's talking about whenever it says that? It's talking about his bloodline. The corruption of the Nephilim bloodline had not touched Noah. It had not touched his kids. And that made Noah a candidate to save the human race. So Satan's plan almost worked. I mean, he came pretty close. And God wiped out the whole human race other than Noah and his family. And God gave the world a fresh start. And so after the flood, then Noah and his sons spread out. And Noah's kids have kids. And their kids have kids. And you start getting a pretty good population going again. And once again, we're on Messiah watch. One of these families is eventually going to birth the Messiah. I mean, I'm sure Satan is on the lookout, wondering who it's going to be. And then in Genesis chapter 12, God narrows the focus. God takes this man who's named Abraham. He says this to him in Genesis 12, verses 2 and 3. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And God takes this guy Abraham, he gives him many promises, makes covenants with him, and from this point on, God narrowed the scope of his prophecy. Of all the people in the world, the Messiah is not going to come from just any family, not just any woman. The Messiah is going to be descended from Abraham specifically. This is the promise. And God says to go to Canaan. He says, I'm going to give you that land. And so Abraham goes to that land, and then immediately a famine hits, and Abraham runs away to Egypt. And the Bible doesn't say that the devil caused the famine, but I'm just saying it sure is convenient how the famine got Abraham out of that land where God wanted him in. Then Abraham has two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. And God says the promise is going to go through Isaac, not Ishmael. Then Isaac has two sons, Jacob and Esau. And God says the promise is going to come through Jacob, not Esau. And so if you're on Messiah watch, and you know the devil's on Messiah watch at this point, you know which person you have to watch, which descendants you need to kill if you want to stop the Messiah from coming. If the devil wants to stop the Messiah, he doesn't have to worry about killing all of humanity again. He doesn't have to corrupt all flesh on the earth again. All he has to do is stop this one family line, the family of Jacob. And so Satan's master plan to stop the Messiah back in the Old Testament, at this point, it's really just a plan to kill all of the Israelites. Because Jacob has 12 sons, and these 12 sons flourish, and they grow, and they have families of their own. And then they're hit with another famine in the land that God wanted them to have. And they run away to Egypt. And the Bible doesn't say that the devil caused this famine either. But it sure is convenient how it got Jacob and his 12 sons out of that land that God wanted them in. And so now they're in Egypt, and they're there for so long that the Egyptians eventually enslaved them. Now they're stuck there. They're forced to work. They can't go back to the land that God wanted them in. And I believe all that was a plot of Satan. God wanted the Israelites in the land, but Satan had found a way to keep them out of it. And while they were there, while they were out of it for those hundreds of years, while they were stuck over there in Egypt, Satan was laying down a minefield in the land of Israel, the promised land. It was also known as the land of the Canaanites. And we learn in Numbers 13 that the Canaanites are infused with another round of Nephilim. And if Israel ever goes back there and intermingles with the Nephilim, it's going to be game over for that messianic bloodline. So we know eventually that God gets the Israelites out of Egypt and that he leads them back to their land. And that's why when they go into Canaan, God constantly is telling them, don't leave anything alive whenever you get back there. No, and he says, no man, woman, boy, or girl. He says, totally wipe them all out. This is to be a total cleansing. Don't tolerate the Nephilim. Don't keep any of their kids or any of their women, anyone that they have in their villages, because they might have some of this Nephilim DNA in their system. And we have to wipe it all out, because if we intermingle with them, if that gets into our bloodline, there will be no possibility of a future Messiah coming from them. And so it took some time, but eventually They wiped out all the Nephilim there in Canaan, all those Canaanites. They eventually wiped all the giants out. And so Satan's plans were failing. The last of the Nephilim, they lasted until the reign of King David. And of course, he took down that really famous Nephilim, Goliath. And it says that he and his mighty men, they wiped out Goliath's brothers. You can read about that in 2 Samuel 23. And by the way, these were not just ghost stories to tell around the campfire. This is historical narrative in your Old Testament, that these giants, these Nephilim, were getting wiped out by David and his mighty men. This was also spiritual warfare. This really happened as historical fact, but this was spiritual warfare against the forces of Satan, and Satan was losing. The opportunity to corrupt the bloodline of the Israelites, it was fading away. And now there are so many Israelites running around Israel. How could Satan ever fulfill his plan and kill all of these Jews? But then God narrows the scope of the prophecy even further. God says it's not going to be just any descendant of Jacob that brings the Messiah. The Messiah will come through one specific Israelite's bloodline. In 2 Samuel 7:12, God told David, "When your days are fulfilled and you rest with your fathers, I will set up your seed after you, who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom." And so now the scope of this prophecy has narrowed once again. The Messiah is going to come through David. And so let's just recap this. What's been going on all through the Bible? Originally, God had said the Messiah would come through the seed of a woman, through a descendant of Eve. So Satan tried to corrupt all the descendants of Eve. Then God wiped them away. He started over with Noah. And God said the Messiah was going to come through Abraham. Then God said it would be through Isaac. Then God said it would be through Jacob. And so Satan tried to wipe out all of Jacob's descendants. And now God has said that the promise of the Messiah would come through David specifically. So the scope has been narrowed once again. And as you read about the kings of Israel, as you trace David's bloodline through 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you're going to read stories like this when Queen Athaliah tried to cut off the Davidic bloodline. In 2 Kings 11, verses 1 through 3, it says, "When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal heirs. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being murdered. And they hid him and his nurse in the bedroom from Athaliah so that he was not killed. So he was hidden with her in the house of the Lord for 6 years while Athaliah reigned over the land." So in this little story in 2 Kings 11, all the king's sons were murdered by this wicked woman, Athaliah. All of them except one. Now, I believe this was an attack by Satan again. It wasn't just Athaliah being a little bit ambitious right here. She was being fueled by the devil. He knew that he only had to wipe out David's bloodline now, because if he could stop David's bloodline, he could stop the Messiah. But there was a woman named Jehosheba. She saved one of the boys. It was a baby. His name was Joash. She hid him away for 6 years. And all those years later, he comes back whenever he's 7, and they brought him back. They killed Athaliah. They crowned him king. And at 7 years old, the bloodline moved forward. And so Satan had tried to wipe out that bloodline. He got all but one of them. And I love that little story. It's just one little anecdote in the Bible. It was probably the closest that Satan ever came to stopping God's plans. Maybe other than the whole deal with Noah and the flood. But he came so close right here. And yet, Satan couldn't do it because God always preserves a remnant. God always makes a way. And every time you see someone in the Bible, whether it's Haman, whether it's Nebuchadnezzar, no matter who, every time you see somebody who's trying to commit a genocide against the Jews, this is a plot of the devil to stop God's plans. And yet, Satan's schemes, they never work out. I mean, they just give us another great Bible story. They usually give the Jews another holiday on their calendar. And God even laid some more restrictions on who could be the future Messiah back in the Old Testament. God said that he would have to be born in Bethlehem. And then whenever Jesus was born, Herod tried to have all the babies slaughtered who were in Bethlehem. So Satan tried it again. And he drove the promise from the land into Egypt once again. But Satan failed. Satan did not derail prophecy. He actually fulfilled prophecy. Out of Egypt I have called my son. It's like no matter what Satan schemed, no matter what he planned, he was never able to stop what God wanted to do. So you might say God kept trying to make it easier and easier for Satan to win. It's like first it was just to kill humanity. Okay, now you don't have to kill all of humanity, just Abraham's descendants. Well, now just Jacob's descendants. Well, now just David's descendants. And so it never, no matter how easy, I'm kind of speaking flippantly here, but no matter how easy God tried to make it for Satan, Satan could never seal the deal. His master plan in the Old Testament was to stop the Messiah, and he never could. And that's why I released this program for Christmas, because Christmas means that the devil failed. From the days of Adam and Eve, it was for 4,000 years, and Satan tried everything he could during that time, enslaving the Hebrews, killing the babies, tainting the bloodline, dominating their land with giants, wiping out families, and Satan came close a couple times, but he never won. His master plan failed, and Christmas sealed the deal. So what is he up to now? Well, we will chat about that as we close down today. Well, as I said, this is your Christmas episode. Next week, Christmas Day is on a Wednesday, and I think you should spend that time with your family instead of listening to me. So I'm not going to have a new episode until 2025, which actually is going to start on a Wednesday. So let's start the year off weird. And I do have some things that I'm really excited to share in the first month of next year. I basically have my next 5 or 6 lessons all mapped out. And I really can't wait for 2025 to get here so that I can share what I have been learning. Make sure that you're subscribed so you can get it. And okay, well, let's close up for today. So the Messiah has already come, and that might cause us to wonder, well, what is Satan's plan now? What is his plan today? Well, believe it or not, it's the same that it was before. Kill the Jews. Now you might be wondering, wait a minute. But Jesus has already showed up. So why would Satan still have the same plan now that he did before? Well, let me walk you through all that. So once Jesus showed up on the scene, Satan's new master plan, it switched from killing the Jews. Now it was to kill Jesus. Now that one kind of blew up in his face. I won't spend much time on that one. If you're listening to this podcast, you know about the death and resurrection of Jesus, and it was actually God's plan all along. There's that movie. I've only seen it once. I think it's called The Passion of the Christ, the one that Mel Gibson did. And it's that movie that's all about the crucifixion of Jesus. It came out like 20 years ago. I can't believe it. But I do remember towards the beginning of that movie, it has the scene where Jesus is praying and like there's a snake slithering up behind him. And just whenever you thought it might bite Jesus, he stomps on it and kills it. And, it's just a little thing they put in the movie. We know it didn't probably actually happen. But I love the symbolism right there of, how Genesis 3, it said, he shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. And it's just kind of a cool, cinematically kind of a cool moment. Satan thought that he got the win on Jesus with the cross. Of course, Jesus turned that right around on him. He conquered death, hell, and the grave. He purchased the redemption of our bodies, of our souls, of a whole new creation. And so at that point, Satan is 0 for 2. But then right before Jesus went to the cross, Jesus gave this lament over his people. He said in Matthew 23, verses 37 through 39, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing? See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So right there, Jesus has staked his second coming on the salvation of the Jewish people. He said, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So the first time Jesus came to this earth, he was rejected by his own people. Not 100% of them, but by and large. I mean, this crowd, they ended up having him crucified just a few days after he said these words. Now, I don't have the demographic information from the Jews back then, but if we even look at today, only about 1% of Jewish people are saved. And so what I'm going to say next, I know this gets a little bit into eschatology, and I'm sure with everybody who's listening today, there's a variety of end times views out there among the listeners, okay? I'm going to give you my view. I believe that Jesus has said that he is not going to return again until the Jewish people collectively accept him as the Messiah. And I don't just base that off of this verse. Romans 11:25 and 26 affirm this, where Paul says, "Lest you be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved." So Paul confirms right there that all Israel will someday be saved. And I believe that Jesus will not return until that happens. Because once he returns, it's game over. But he won't return until two things happen. One, when the gospel's been preached to everybody in the world, and every person on the planet has had an opportunity to get saved. Now, some would say that that's already happened because every country on earth has been reached with the gospel. Others might say, there's some people in remote parts of the world who've never even heard the name of Jesus, so they'd say it hasn't happened yet. Matthew 24:14, it says this, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." So we know that one item on Satan's agenda is that he wants to oppose the spread of the gospel. We all know that. But two, Satan has a way that he can stop Jesus from coming again if the Jewish people are wiped out before they ever repent. And that is why you see the historic, and I would say even very modern, anti-Semitism against this people group who make up a very tiny portion of the global population. This is why you see a completely illogical opposition to them even having their own country over there in one tiny sliver of land in the Middle East. This is a satanically fueled racial hatred because Satan knows that if he can get rid of the Jews, then he can stop the second coming of Christ. That's why you saw Hitler kill 6 million of them. That was 1/3 of the Jewish people in the world, and he did not intend to stop until he got all of them. Now, sadly, the book of Zechariah says that in the era of the Antichrist in the end times, it says that the Antichrist will kill 2/3 of the Jewish people, but he's not going to kill them all. Zechariah also says in chapter 12, verse 10, "And I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and will grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn." So Satan's master plan today is once again to kill the Jews before they have a chance to repent and turn to Jesus. And he'll almost succeed. But God always preserves a remnant. God always wins. And God's master plan is that the Jewish people will turn back to him someday and accept Jesus. Satan couldn't stop the Messiah's first coming, and that's why we have Christmas next week. Satan is trying, but I don't believe for a minute that he's going to be able to stop the Messiah's second coming either. And so I know this was a weird subject matter to study right here at Christmas time, but I truly hope that it made the overall story of your Bible a little less weird. Thanks for listening. Merry Christmas to each and every one of you, and we'll see you in the new year on Weird Stuff in the Bible.